Chapter 9, Crusaders, 2027. Scene 30, Sheila. The pride Sheila felt was like a gust of fresh air. Standing with her colleagues behind the mayor, she straightened her back and took a deep breath. This was the point in the speech where Alejandro Garcia was going to highlight Sheila's idea. For less than $100, Garcia said, Chicago residents can travel to any point in America as long as they stay within the workers' relocation system. Some reporters in the scrum hooted as they clapped enthusiastically. The program had become personal for them during the briefing Sheila gave before the speech. RCFP was a well-known advocate for press freedoms, and now its members were included among those eligible for workforce mobility benefits. Realizing bi-coastal travel was now affordable, they peppered Sheila with questions as she explained that a trip from New York to L.A. met the maximum cost of $100. Sheila kept her back straight and her hands clasped in front of her waist as she stared through the floor-to-ceiling window, on the other side of which a constant stream of planes taxied the runway in both directions. She hadn't flown until she was an adult, which also happened to be her first trip to Chicago 8 years ago. Lugging her Vanderbilt duffel and backpack, she marched through the underground pedestrian tunnel to the Blue Line station, rode the elevated train through Black, Mexican, and Polish neighborhoods, and walked on to the lakeside campus of Northwestern University. In the years that followed, Sheila spent so much time studying the lives of single mothers in the Windy City that in spite of getting offers from NYU, Duke, and the California Institute of Technology, she accepted a position at UIC. Hostile employees were gathering information and directing the program's lucky participants to the counter as the mayor came to the end of her speech. Sheila looked beyond the reporters to the line of weary travelers that formed on the other side of the red ribbon. Some were males, salesmen and construction workers, Sheila guessed. But just as her models predicted, the hostel was about to receive more than 24 women seeking a better life for themselves and for their children. Millions of boys and girls have been lifted out of poverty when Congress finally made the child tax credit permanent, and now their mothers were in a position to go wherever jobs were plentiful. The hostels were an essential feature of the workers' relocation system. Recipients of mobility benefits were only allowed to fly standby, which meant their wait time could span from several hours to several days. Millions of Americans were desperate, since the autocrats' self-serving economic policies had created the worst job market since the Great Depression. Picking up and moving wasn't easy, but for a third of the country, there was simply nothing to leave. Sheila thought about the dilapidated house her mother still rented back in Crossville, Tennessee. How different her life might have been if Mamie Jackson had the means to escape her hometown when Sheila was a child. The mayor raised her hands in the air as if the christening ceremony was sacred and the gleaming new addition to the airport was a temple. It's my pleasure to inaugurate the city of Chicago's Worker Relocation Hostel. As another round of applause washed over Sheila and her colleagues, Sheldon Blake, the mayor's aide, stepped forward and handed a giant pair of scissors to Garcia. As she watched the mayor cut the ribbon, Sheila's hair rose on the back of her neck. She turned, and there was Sheldon, giving her a flirty wink. At the front of the line, a haggard-looking woman and her 3 school-aged girls started to half-carry, half-push their luggage toward the counter. Overwhelmed with an urge to help, Sheila darted away from the group. "Would you like me to carry some of that?" she said. "Oh, thank you," the woman breathed, then eagerly unstrapped the bag from her shoulder. Wondering where the family's trip had started, Sheila took the bag and bent down to heft another. Once they reached the counter, Sheila turned to the woman and smiled. "Where are you going, if you don't mind me asking?" The oldest girl, who looked to be about 12, raised a slender hand to her head, then flicked her braids as if to say, "That's none of your business." But the one in the middle, who might have been 9, craned her neck to meet Sheila's eyes. "Phoenix, Arizona," the girl said, with a burst of enthusiasm that warmed Sheila's heart. That's wonderful, Sheila said, energized by the hope she saw in the plump, brown face. She didn't know this little family, but she knew their situation. She looked down at the youngest, who was clutching a small red backpack with both hands. Packed away safe in that bag, Sheila thought, is your one special toy, I bet. The girl was about 7, the year in which Sheila received the Dora the Explorer from the Salvation Army on Christmas Day. Their mom turned to Sheila and asked, "You work for the city?" "No," Sheila said. "Why?" "'Cause you was standing up there with them." The woman nodded her head, and Sheila turned just in time to see Mayor Garcia and the rest of the group disappear down the hall. "No, UIC," Sheila said quickly before jogging away. As if cueing up a song, the woman's voice came over Sheila's shoulder. "What do we say, girls?" There was a chorus of "thank yous" as Sheila stepped alongside Father Joshua Bailey, who turned to her with a knowing grin. Sheila raised her hand in the air. I know, I know." She shook her head as they both said in unison, "You are a social worker at heart." The sarcasm in Sheila's voice was a sharp contrast to the priest's kindly tone. He said, "You know I admire your work, Professor, but as I've said many times." He raised both hands to his chest and squeezed them into fists. "The passion in your analysis humanizes people, so it's easy to see them behind the numbers." "You're not so bad yourself," Sheila said. "How does a man born in Nigeria become the leading expert on domestic terrorism in America?" Father Obele's expression turned grave. Language and culture may differ. He tapped the device hooked over his left ear. But the tactics are always the same. During the midterm elections in the previous year, Immigration and Customs Enforcement had ditched the pretense of operating in accordance with the law that created the agency. So ICE was officially labeled by several governors as an invading force. Public resistance was so intense, ICE agents had resorted to prowling the country as rogue militias. Yet again, the autocrat has successfully created a constitutional gray zone, which, in turn, triggered a flurry of litigation. Father Obele was part of the local team dedicated to tracking the movements of ICE militias. "I heard you got a warrant to bug their cells," Sheila said. "Are you listening to the goons right now?" Obele removed his phone from his pocket. "These," he said, "are the 3 groups that have been cited." On the screen was a map of Cook County. Dozens of red dots clustered around 2 well-known Hispanic communities. "Their chatter is disturbing," he said, "but it doesn't sound like they know anything about the Workers' Relocation Program." Sheila shook her head and favored the priest with a grateful look. "I don't know how you can handle it, but I'm glad you do." Per Obele's advice, the hostile security system was discreet. There were cameras everywhere, but they were only visible to specialists who knew what to look for. Plainclothes officers posing as passengers were the facility's primary means of security. The hostel wasn't a 5-star hotel, but it also didn't feel like a prison. The common room, which included a self-service kitchen, a dining area, and a lounge, was clean and well organized, with modest amenities. Father Obele leaned towards Sheila and said conspiratorially, "That," he pointed at a group of boys and girls skipping toward a section near a floor-to-ceiling window, "was one of your best suggestions." Anticipating the presence of families, local authorities raised money for a rather extensive play area. The 2 little girls from earlier, being reluctantly escorted by their sullen 12-year-old sister, eagerly followed the tiny parade. From the kitchen, their mother lifted a banana from the counter and called out, "You'd better not lose them, Brandy." "I won't," the girl called back. Sheila glanced to Obele, and the 2 shared an incredulous look. Once again, she felt the hair rise on the back of her neck and made the same mistake from earlier, turning in time to see the mayor's grinning aide striding toward her like a man on a mission. Apparently, in addition to being misguided, Sheldon's interest was strong enough to risk not being available in the event he was needed by the mayor. Damn, Sheila said in a harsh whisper. O'Bailey followed her gaze and caught on immediately. Mr. Blake, he said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. Tremendous opening. I must congratulate your office. Seizing the moment, Sheila darted down one of the halls that connected other parts of the hostel to the common area. She'd been distracted by the priest and hadn't noticed where the group had gone next. She did know, however, that the living quarters were part of the tour. There's gotta be this way, she thought, as she pushed through a pair of swinging doors at the end of the hall. Like a frightened rabbit, she made a right, then a left, then a right. Realizing that she'd stumbled into a maze, she stopped short and placed her hands on her hips. Every door in this area had a glass window, through which Sheila could see shelves crammed with boxes. Her chest swelled with hope at the sight of the employee's schedule hanging next to a door, but when she reached it, the office was closed. This was a dead end, and the only way out was to retrace her steps. She let out a sigh of relief as she pushed through a pair of doors again, but the hall on the other side was unfamiliar. Seeing the bright light at the other end, Sheila remembered that all corridors fed into the common area. She needed to catch her breath, so she ambled slowly toward the place where the hall and the main part of the hostel met. She was steps away when she heard it, a rapid succession of shots. Sheila froze as two women and their children ran by. The urge to follow made her bend into a launching position, but before her legs could work, the group turned and ran the other way. One of the girls was slammed to the ground by a round of bullets. Sheila clutched her mouth with both hands, but was too terrified to scream. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the mass of blood that had pooled around the tiny skirt. Transfixed, Sheila missed Father O'Bailey as he sprinted through the common area away from the kitchen. He didn't draw her eye until he was close, but as Sheila turned in his direction, a lone bullet struck him square in the neck. The priest twirled in the air before his body hit the floor and slid all the way to Sheila's feet. She fell to her knees and placed her hands on his chest. His heart slowed as his life drained away. A second later, it stopped altogether. In a fit of rage, Sheila arched her back and burst into tears. The pause in gunfire caused an eerie silence, which is the only reason she noticed the tiny voices coming out of O'Bailey's earpiece. Holy fuck, this place is crawling with rats. That's why we're here. Time to exterminate. Come here, you little piece of shit. The revelry of the ICE agents was followed by a report of gunfire. The earpiece lay on the ground next to the priest's head. Sheila picked it up and held it with trembling fingers. Some of these fucking passengers got guns. Probably cops. Plainclothes. Shit! Cover me! Tossing the earpiece, Sheila ran. The employee area was to the right, so she hung a left after bursting through the doors. Once again, this part of the hostel was unfamiliar, but to her left, there was the light from the common area, the focal point of all the activity. Sheila tried every door as she stumbled nervously in the opposite direction. The echo of boots made her turn around. A figure strode quickly past the brightly lit end of the hall. Like an after-image, his fatigues, semi-automatic rifle, and Kevlar vest came together in Sheila's mind. She squatted as a second man followed the first in what looked like a sweep of the hostel. Praying to God her luck would hold, Sheila frog-marched away from the light. Something about the second to the last room caused her to give it a try. She practically fell inside when the knob turned and the door opened. Cowering in the corner behind a bunk bed was the woman and her 3 girls. Scanning with intent, Sheila spotted a chest of drawers. She mimed the act of pushing it against the door and beckoned the family to come forward. The 4 ran quickly, and together they shoved the heavy wood furniture as quietly as they could. Taking another look around, Sheila saw that the room had a small kitchen and, to her horror, another door that led into an adjoining room. Hoping she had just enough time to make sure it was locked, she crossed the threshold. The room had a dresser as well, a bed, and a chair. Sheila grabbed it at the very moment the knob in the next room was shot off by a round of bullets. The girls screamed as the door opened a notch. Sheila tried to wave them from one room to the other, but the family was too terrified to notice her pleas. She might buy a little time by locking herself in the adjoining room, but that would also seal their fate. Trembling, she slid under the bed. In the next room, a crack of wood made contact with wood. "Give me a hand," a man grunted, before Sheila heard the screech of the dresser as it was pushed away from the door sill. To Sheila's surprise, the women and the girls crossed from one room to the other just as she heard a final grunt and the sound of boots. From under the bed, Sheila saw the frantic scramble of 8 tennis shoe-covered feet as the little family tried to close the second door, but that was blocked by the sudden appearance of a man-sized shoe. "Watch the hall," yelled the owner when he entered the room. Seconds later, there was a burst of shots. The sound was muffled as bullets made contact with flesh. Tears streamed from her eyes as Sheila pressed her head against the floor. In the quiet that followed, she heard the trickle of urine over the clatter of her teeth. Trash like this will be all over the country if we let these places stand. The ICE agent zipped his pants. "Hand me the charges." "You got it, brother." If Sheila stayed quiet, she was going to be blown to pieces. If she tried to run, she would be shot. A violent shiver flowed from Sheila from the effort of trying to keep her teeth from chattering. Eyes closed, she flattened her body against the cool tile floor and listened intently for signs of what was happening. She thought her mind was playing tricks when a melodic gong reverberated through the air. Sheila opened her eyes and stiffened like a board as a stern military voice came over the loudspeaker. "My name is Lieutenant Thomas Mack. It's important that you understand 2 things. The room is video monitored, and you are completely surrounded." "Shit!" cried one of the men. Sheila had no idea where the speaker was located, but the lieutenant's voice seemed to be everywhere when he said, "You 2 can make this easy on yourselves. Place the weapons in the hall, raise your hands in the air, and step out of the room, slowly." One man grunted to the other, "Take out the charges. Don't even think about setting that bomb." The lieutenant's commanding tone released a flood of hope in Sheila. Her heart was still pounding, but hearing his confidence, she actually started to believe she might live through this. She saw 4 desperate hands rummage through a backpack and realized the lookout had taken his eyes off the door. From the hall, a soldier yelled, "Drop your weapon and place your hands over your head." 3 shots were followed by silence. Sheila stared at the 6 dead bodies on the floor. Shutting her eyes, tears flowed again, but not from fear, from rage. Rage for the victims, rage for the living, rage from having been given the burden of mourning, the guilt of surviving, the hard, undeniable certainty of being prey in a country woefully incapable of protecting its citizens. It had taken so long to build a way for people to escape the poverty produced by an unjust society, and these men, driven by hate, advantaged by privilege, and empowered to destroy by a legal system that was blind to their crimes, spent their time organizing and planning to tear it all down. What kind of country spawns monsters like that? A woman said, "It's safe now, Professor. You can come out." With the sudden release of tension, Sheila's entire body convulsed. She can barely see the hand being extended or the woman's knees as she squatted down. With an effort, Sheila wiped the last of her tears and got a hold of herself. When the woman leaned forward and took Sheila's hand, she was struck by the fact that she was being rescued by a soldier. 6 years earlier, the governor of South Dakota sent her National Guard to Texas. A billionaire paid for the trip. Their mission, keep out illegals. In plain sight, civil war had been declared all the way back in 2021. Once they were in the hall, Sheila whispered, "Are we at war?" Perplexed, the soldier narrowed her eyes. Sheila tilted her head, indicating the uniform. Warwick was woven in black letters over the breastplate of the shirt. "No," the soldier said. "Well," Sheila cut in. The federal government has declared war on the rest of us, hasn't it?